Eve, the first awakening. Have you ever imagined witnessing the world's first dawn, when dew was still a novelty on newly created leaves, when each animal had just received its name, when time itself seemed suspended in an eternity of perfection? In this primordial garden, a man walks alone. He has everything: abundance, beauty, communion with the divine. And yet, there is an emptiness, an absence that not even paradise can fill. It is then that the second most extraordinary act of creation occurs. From Adam's deep sleep, from his very being, emerges she, not from the dust of the earth like all other creatures, but from human essence itself. Eve is born, not as a secondary story or an appendix to the male narrative, but as the final piece of the cosmic puzzle. But who was Eve really? A simple helper created to serve, as superficial interpretations suggest? Or was she the complementary expression of the divine image, without whom not even paradise would be complete? In this journey, we will unravel not just Eve's origin, but what she represents in each of us, men and women alike. Prepare to see through the eyes of the one who was first to ask the fundamental question of all consciousness. What if there is more than what we've been told? Eve is not just the first woman, she is the first awakening of full consciousness, the first step toward humanity as we know it. The name and its hidden power. To understand Eve, we must first unravel the power of her name, a secret hidden in layers of translation and interpretation over millennia. In the original language, she is called Chavah, Havahar name, given to her only after the so-called fall. But why? What changed to merit this new name? Chavah shares roots with the Hebrew word chaya, higher meaning to live or to give life. Literally, Eve is the living one, the source of life. Consider the depth of this meaning. At the exact moment humanity confronts mortality, Adam names his companion with a title that celebrates life. Fascinating insight. In ancient Middle Eastern cultures, naming something or someone was an act of tremendous power. It was not just assigning a label, but recognizing the deepest essence of being. When Adam names Eve as source of life, he is revealing her true nature, not as the origin of sin, but as the origin of human continuity. While Adam's name connects him to dust, Adamah, Eve's name connects her to the very life force of the universe. This distinction is not accidental. It's a fundamental clue about her archetypal role. What few people know is that in the oldest Jewish mystical traditions, Eve was not considered the origin of the fall, but rather the first to take the necessary step for humanity to move from spiritual infancy toward the maturity of full consciousness. Her name carries no shame, it carries power. From the side, not from dust, Eve's origin is radically different from everything that came before. Each animal, each plant, and even Adam himself were formed from the dust of the earth. But Eve, she emerges from humanity itself, not from below, but from the side. And from the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man, he made a woman. This is the traditional translation, but it hides a much deeper meaning. The Hebrew word tsela doesn't just mean rib. It also means side or chamber. Some ancient scholars believed it referred to half of an originally androgynous Adam. Consider the symbolism. The rib protects the heart. It is flexible and regenerative, and most importantly, it is the only part of the body that comes from the side, not from above, suggesting domination, nor from below, suggesting submission. Surprising curiosity. In various ancient Jewish traditions, it was believed that Adam was originally created as an androgynous being, containing both masculine and feminine, and that Eve represented the separation of these principles into two distinct persons, destined to reunite. This interpretation suggests that masculine and feminine together more fully reflect the divine image, transitioned to images of ancient manuscripts with the Hebrew words ezer kenegdo. Now, we come to one of history's greatest misunderstandings. Eve is described as Adam's helper, ezer kenegdo, vodner kh, ezerin, the original Hebrew. For centuries, this expression was used to justify subordination. But the truth hidden in the original words is revolutionary. Music intensifies, images of lightning and storms. Ezer appears 21 times in the Hebrew Bible, and in 16 of them, do you know who it refers to? To God himself as helper. It is a term of strength, not servitude. And kenegdo, it literally means in front of him, suggesting equality, constructive confrontation, complementarity. Eve was not created to serve Adam, but to complete him, to stand before him as a mirror and a challenge, to bring what he alone could not be. Loneliness and the incomplete paradise. Let's pause and consider something extraordinary. Before Eve's creation, there was something in paradise described as not good. This is the first time something in paradise is described as not good, a shocking contrast to the repeated refrain of creation. And God saw that it was good. What does this reveal to us? That not even paradise is sufficient without deep connection. Not even the divine presence completely fills the human need for another who is similar, yet different. Adam had named each animal, exercising his dominion over creation. But in none of them did he find what his soul longed for, an equal with whom he could relate, someone who was simultaneously like him and different from him. Little-known curiosity. Scholars of Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition, interpret Eve's creation as the manifestation of the Shekinah, the feminine presence of God in the world. According to this tradition, divine fullness includes both masculine and feminine qualities, and Eve would represent the earthly manifestation of this divine aspect. It is profoundly significant that the first not good in the universe is loneliness. This reveals something fundamental about our nature. We are relational beings to our core. Our completeness is not found in self-sufficiency, but in interconnection. Soft music, images of diverse people in moments of genuine human connection. Eve, therefore, represents not just woman, but the principle of otherness, the necessary difference for self-knowledge and love. Through her, Adam finds not just companionship, but a mirror, someone capable of showing him who he really is. And isn't that exactly what we all seek? Someone who truly sees us, who reflects our humanity back to us, who helps us discover who we really are. The serpent and the awakening. In the heart of the garden stood two special trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The first accessible, the second forbidden. It is here that a third character enters, described as more crafty than any other wild animal. There's something few people know about the word serpent in Hebrew. Nachash, Shana, shares roots with words for brightness and enchantment, suggesting not an obvious villain, but something fascinating, seductive, even illuminating. Fascinating. Curiosity. In many ancient Middle Eastern cultures, the serpent was a symbol of wisdom, renewal for shedding its skin, and transcendent knowledge. In Egypt, it was a symbol of royal protection. In Mesopotamia, it was associated with healing. This makes us question, was the serpent really absolute, evil, or something more complex? The serpent doesn't force or coerce, simply questions. Did God really say that? Will you die if you eat the fruit? This is the first question in human history, the birth of questioning, of doubt, of the possibility of alternative perspectives. And it is Eve who first faces this fundamental existential dilemma, to trust blindly or to explore the limits of knowledge. She examines the fruit. It is good for food, pleasing to the eye, and desirable for gaining wisdom. For centuries, Eve was blamed alone for the fall. But the original text tells a different and surprising story. Genesis 3:6 clearly states that Adam was with her during the entire dialogue with the serpent. He heard everything, witnessed everything, and remained silent. He didn't protect, didn't question, didn't exercise his supposed role as guardian. The uncomfortable truth many ignore: Eve did not act alone. Responsibility was shared. She actively questioned and explored. He passively consented and then participated. What was really at stake in that moment? It wasn't just a fruit. It was the birth of full consciousness, the awakening to possibilities beyond established limits, the transition from innocence to experience, and perhaps this awakening was necessary from the beginning. The eyes that open, then the eyes of both were opened. This simple phrase marks humanity's most profound transformation. But what does it really mean? Many traditions interpret this opening of eyes not as the discovery of evil, but as the awakening of full consciousness, the passage from childlike innocence to adult maturity. Eve didn't choose the fruit out of malice or rebellion, but moved by something profoundly human: curiosity, desire for knowledge, quest for growth. Observe the three aspects that attracted Eve: nutritional value, good for food; aesthetic beauty, pleasant to the eyes; and potential for wisdom, desirable to make one wise. Aren't these the elements that still attract us to knowledge today? The useful, the beautiful, and the transcendent. Surprising revelation. Many medieval Jewish theologians, like Maimonides, interpreted the knowledge of good and evil not as moral information, but as moral experience. The transition from intellectually understanding good and evil to experiencing them directly, with all the consequences that brings. The first consequence of this awakening is self-consciousness. Suddenly, they perceive their vulnerability, their exposure. Innocence gives way to complexity. Immediate trust is replaced by reflection. But observe something crucial. Even facing these new experiences, shame, fear, difficulty, the text doesn't say Eve regretted it. There is no indication that she considered her choice a mistake. On the contrary, as we will see, she fully embraces her new reality. This suggests a radically different interpretation. What if the forbidden fruit wasn't a test to fail, but a stage to transcend? What if paradise wasn't a final state, but an initial state, an incubator that would eventually become too small for beings destined for full consciousness? Consequences and grace. When God confronts the couple, the first cycle of blame transfer in history occurs. Adam blames Eve, the woman you gave me. Eve blames the serpent. This very human response, avoiding responsibility, is the first sign of wounded consciousness. The consequences are presented not as arbitrary punishments, but as natural results of the separation between humanity and divinity. For the serpent, crawling and enmity. For the woman, pain in childbirth and tension in relationships. For the man, hard labor and return to dust, profound revelation. Many scholars note that these curses are not new creations, but intensifications of already existing realities. Childbirth would already exist, though without pain. Work would already exist, though without frustration. Death would already be part of the natural cycle, though without spiritual separation. What changed was the human experience of these realities. Perhaps the most mysterious and poetic moment of the narrative occurs when, even in judgment, God demonstrates grace, making garments of skin to cover Adam and Eve's nakedness. Even in expulsion, there is care. Even in consequence, there is provision. It is at this moment, not in paradise but in exile, that Eve receives her name. Adam calls her Chavah, source of life, mother of all living. It is a name of hope, not condemnation. A name that looks to the future, not to the lost past. There is deep wisdom in this late nomenclature. Only when confronting mortality can Eve fully become life. Only by knowing limits can she embrace possibilities. Only by losing paradise can she discover her true function, not just existing in static perfection, but generating life amid imperfection. Eve chooses life, not the static immortality of Eden, but dynamic, generative life that renews itself through generations. She is not paralyzed by the lost paradise, but becomes the source through which all humanity flows. Eve through the ages, over millennia, Eve has been interpreted, reinterpreted, and often misinterpreted. Her image has been shaped by the ideologies, fears, and aspirations of each era. Let's explore 5 radically different visions. The traditional patriarchal view presents Eve as the temptress, the origin of evil, the weak one who yielded first. For centuries, this interpretation justified female subordination, treating women as morally fragile and needing male supervision. But does the original text really support this view? The feminist reinterpretation, emerging mainly in the 20th century, recognizes Eve as the first to seek knowledge and autonomy. Her choice is not seen as sin, but as a necessary step for full human consciousness. Eve represents the courage to question authorities and expand horizons. Revealing curiosity. In 1895, Elizabeth Cady Stanton published The Woman's Bible, where she argued that Eve was the first scientist demonstrating intellectual courage by seeking knowledge despite prohibitions. This radical interpretation was strongly condemned at the time. The Gnostic view, preserved in texts discovered at Nag Hammadi in Egypt in 1945, completely reverses the narrative. In some of these texts, like the Apocryphon of John, Eve is presented as a bearer of spiritual wisdom, even as a manifestation of divine Sophia, feminine wisdom of God, guiding humanity toward an awakening beyond physical limitations. The serpent in this view is a messenger of light, not darkness. The psychological interpretation, developed by Carl Jung and his followers, sees Eve as representing the principle of anima, the archetypal feminine present in all psyches, regardless of gender. Eve symbolizes intuition, emotion, connection with the unconscious, complementing the logos, rational principle represented by Adam. The fall represents the necessary integration of these principles in human consciousness. Modern, ecofeminist understanding sees Eve's connection with life, Chavah, as representative of the interconnection of all living things. Eve embodies an ethic of care and responsibility for the web of life, in contrast to models of domination over nature. Her choice reflects the need for harmonious relationship, not control. What all these interpretations reveal is that Eve was never just a historical character. She is a living symbol, an archetype that continues to evolve as our understanding of human consciousness expands. Each era finds in Eve what it most needs to learn. Eve, in each of you, Eve, lives in each of us, regardless of gender, culture, or belief. She represents universal aspects of human experience that transcend time and space. She is the part of us that questions the established, that is curious about the unknown, that dares to imagine possibilities beyond imposed limits. When a child asks, why? When a scientist challenges an established paradigm, when an artist creates something never before seen, Eve awakens. Eve is also our fundamental need for connection. She reminds us that it is not good to be alone, that we find our fullest humanity not in isolation, but in relationships. In a world that often worships individualism and self-sufficiency, Eve whispers that we need each other. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of Eve in us is her creative resilience. When paradise closed, she wasn't paralyzed by lost perfection. She embraced her name, source of life, and moved forward, generating new beginnings even amid difficulty. Powerful reflection. Each time we choose life amid adversity, each time we generate hope where there was despair, each time we create beauty in unlikely places, we are channeling Eve's archetypal energy. Ultimately, Eve invites us to a profound synthesis, to integrate the knowledge we gained by eating the fruit with the life we can generate and nurture. Consciousness without connection is sterile. Vitality without discernment is blind. Eve represents the possibility of uniting both. Like Eve, we are constantly before the tree of knowledge, facing choices between comfort and growth, between blind obedience and conscious discernment. And like Eve, we may discover that even losing certain paradises, we gain a world of possibilities. The eternal awakening, Eve's story, didn't end in Eden. It continues alive in each new awakening of consciousness, in each courageous questioning, in each choice for life, even when life is difficult. Eve is not just a figure from a distant past. She is a continuous call to embrace our complete humanity with all its complexity, its knowledge, and its capacity to generate and nurture life. Eve's true legacy is not the lost paradise, but the possibility found. Not the innocence left behind, but the wisdom that looks forward. Not the fall, but the continuous rising. The invitation remains open, to awaken, like Eve, to the fullness of who we really are. To fall, yes, but to fall in order to grow, to question, doubt, seek, but always in service of life. And perhaps in the end, the true paradise is not a place to return to, but a consciousness to be discovered, here and now, with eyes wide open.